To celebrate season 4 of the hit show The Vikings on HBO, I decided to make a video on the most common things people get wrong about the Vikings. First of all, it's amazing how many people don't get the difference between the Viking homeland, Scandinavia, and where the Vikings settled. This map should clear things up for you if you're one of those people. Now, the Vikings came from modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and nowhere else, okay? Not from Finland, sorry guys, not from Iceland, not from Germany, or Scotland, or Russia, or Timbuktu. Viking homeland was made up of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Now, the Vikings did settle in these places, apart from Timbuktu, where they didn't really go at all. So these crosses represent where they didn't come from, these ticks are where they settled. Now, this map should help you, so take a picture of it if you need to. There we go, that's out the way. Second point relating to geography. There was not one single Viking nation, empire, kingdom, or confederacy. In the beginning of the Viking Age, they didn't even recognise Norway, Sweden and Denmark as independent countries, and when Harald Finnher in 872 AD did unite all of Norway, many Norwegians left for Iceland because screw kings, we're starting a commonwealth that'll last for a few hundred years, and then we might go back to Norwegian kings, but we'll just mumble that slowly in small letters. As the Viking Age went on, the different kingdoms would become established and would fight one another both at home and abroad, although a lot of the fighting wasn't because of the different nationality, but rather because of different allegiances to lords, kings, jarls, and earls. So in a lot of films about Vikings, you see so many guys walking around with swords. You need a lot of metal to make a sword, and that's expensive. Most metal used by the Vikings came from bog iron, which, as the name suggests, is iron pulled out of a bog, and it wasn't very plentiful. A quick note on Viking currency. The Vikings valued silver more than gold because they used silver arm rings to pay for stuff. If a Norseman was a farmer, which most Vikings were, which is odd, they would pay in chickens. Ibn Fadlan was an Arabic emissary from the Abbasid Caliphate based in Baghdad who said of their currency, the Swedes or Rus paid little attention to the face value of the coins. Rather, they used an Arabic system of weights to measure the silver on portable balance scales. Vikings were much more likely to carry axes. Big, tall Dane axes like these were a favourite among the huskarls of both Anglo-Saxon and Norse bodyguards, although these smaller axes were cheaper and more commonly used. Thousands of spearheads have also been found at Viking burial sites. Axes and spears were far more useful for the average Viking to have because it meant that they could use them for repairing ships and felling trees, or for spears with hunting and fishing. Now, another common misconception about the Vikings is that they were dirty people and had no sense of hygiene. Here we have an image of a nicely cleaned up comb found in a Viking grave. The Vikings, in a similar manner to the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, believed that what went into your grave would be what you took with you to another life, and therefore many Viking graves had their most prized possessions. A quick note on this, it's bloody useful for us archaeologists and historians thousands of years later because we can see what they valued most, and it means we find lots of cool stuff like Buddha statues from India and Sweden and nice pearl necklaces in Norway. So remember guys, when you get buried, have your iPhone laid next to you so the archaeologists of the future can see what was the most prized possession in today's society. Anyway, here's a picture of a Viking grave, and there inside the red circle is kind of hard to make out, but that is a comb that would have been used for their hair, beards, and well, other hair on the body. This next picture shows the remains of what excavators believe was a sauna. For those of you who don't know what a sauna is, it's basically a room with wood lined on the inside, which is heated from a stove. This stove, or probably in the Vikings' case they would have had a small fire, heats up small rocks which then radiate the heat through the room. Now, they poured water over these hot rocks which then evaporates as steam, and you basically sit in the steam and become cleansed. It's basically a sweaty hot shower without actually getting wet. Anyway, you get my point, it's hygienic and the Vikings were dirty. Although our old friend Ibn Fadlan described them as the filthiest people on Allah's earth, it is thought that the group he was describing was more assimilated in Eastern Bulgar culture than Norse when he met them on the banks of the Volga in Russia. However, another Arab, Ibn Rusta, said of them, Swedes or the Rus are clean in their dress and kind to their slaves. Now, I've seen quite a few history experts in the YouTube comment section fantasizing with a frothing mouth about this one. Nope, I'm not on about Ragnar and Lagertha getting it on in a sauna. It's the whole idea that the Vikings could have conquered the whole continent of North America with a few settlers.
Blasphemy! This is madness! Madness. This is
Stupid. Now, around the year 850 AD, the Vikings settled on the Faroe Islands, and then onto Iceland and later Greenland. Now, there were several problems for these early immigrants. After about 100 years of colonization on Iceland, they started to run out of wood. In fact, the problem was so bad, they had to get wood shipped there from Norway. Great job on the whole eco-friendly thing, guys. Just saying, you had a whole island planted with trees and you got rid of them all after 100 years. You know, the long-term ecological plan? No? Whatever, just me. The weather could be terrible, and one of the most common ways for people to die in Iceland was by falling through the ice and drowning, or just drowning by itself. Communication was difficult. Between Iceland and Norway it was decent, but they still developed differently, and they still had a sort of island mentality, and it was a lot of the early settlers on Iceland were there to get away from the king and the tyranny of the king in Norway, which was Harald Finehair. Now, between Greenland and Iceland it was a lot harder. The Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland was very dangerous and filled with ice that sank many boats filled with settlers. Now, why did they call it the Denmark Strait when it was nowhere near Denmark? Why not the Greno-Icelandic Sea, or the Frosty Sea, or the Cold Current, or something more geographically correct? God, Denmark. No, I mean God as in English God, not your word for good. Stupid Danes. Should just say bra like every decent Scandinavian country does. Back to why communication between Greenland and Iceland was bad. As we see in Titanic, ships filled with people and icebergs have an interesting relationship when they collide. And for the record, they totally could have taken turns on that bit of driftwood. He didn't have to die. Although it would have been warmer back in the 10th century, Greenland should have been called Blueland because your fingers went blue with cold, and the other one's called Iceland, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's cold. Although much of Iceland was quite nice, the first settlers called dibs, and so the latecomers had to make do with barren rocky shores and fjords. It's like on the last day of term when your teacher brings in celebrations and you're waiting and all your friends are getting, and then finally when it's your turn, there's a bounty left. Now, this nice map shows America and the Viking expeditions to the various places in the area. Now, America was for the Vikings a bridge too far, if you will. Even Greenland was pretty much semi-dependent on Iceland and more of a satellite colony than a self-sufficient one. The colony on America also had to deal with the same issues as the colonists did on Greenland and Iceland, and they had to deal with Native Americans who weren't massive fans of theirs. In a funny way, the roles of Europeans and natives on Greenland was the polar, if you'll forgive the pun, opposite of how it would go half a millennium later with Columbus and the natives he encountered. The Norsemen on Greenland were pressured into leaving, in part, by the Inuit who went south in the 13th century and chased away the original Norse inhabitants. Now finally, quite possibly the biggest one I've saved for last. I will spam memes until the world realizes that the Vikings didn't wear frickin' helmets with frickin' horns attached to their frickin' heads. Is that too much to ask? Seriously, guys. I have memes to last for decades. Stop with the horned helmets. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed my video on common misconceptions people have about the Vikings. Maybe this has cleared some things up for you if you're a beginner to the topic, or maybe if you're an old hardened veteran. Maybe you just had a good time and learned some new stuff anyway watching this video. So yeah, thank you all for watching. If you can think of any common misconceptions that I haven't added in this video, then please leave them down below. You know, I'd love to hear your ideas. Yeah, so don't forget to like, comment any that I missed, and subscribe. This has been History with Hilbert.